Orialis Spire hangs between suns, a lattice of white gold metal and slow-turning habitat rings threaded through with blue light. From a distance, it resembles a sea creature frozen mid-motion. Up close, it is all ports and pressure locks and transparent chambers spilling color into the dark. Inside its grand deliberation hall, the noise is a kind of weather. Tones and pulses and translated voices cross like storms. Light bands on the domed ceiling swirl in response to the mood of the delegates. At this moment, they are a confused amber. Mahir Rafiq sits very straight at the human delegation's bench and watches the bands. He knows the software behind them is old Selivar tech, that the colors are a smooth average of heart rate data, pheromone samplers, microelectrical skin potentials, fear, anger, boredom, anticipation. The hall runs hot today. He has never cared for that system. It always feels like being submerged in someone else's nervous system. To his right, Yonah Benami fidgets in her chair. The padded harness at her shoulders works with the motorized base to keep her upright. Tiny servos hum whenever she shifts. Her fingers drum on the armrest in a complicated pattern that is not random. She is half listening to the whispered translator in her ear, half tracking the tension on Mahir's face, half texting with friends back in the Solace diarchy on a slim slate resting against her thigh. The slate's display shows a live feed of the hall from a different angle. It frames her small, lean body against the vastness of alien architecture. The caption, auto-generated by some overeager news channel, "Human case study arrives for mercy debate." She hates that phrase, case study. Yonah's mind flickers, for a moment, to the ship that brought her here. The way her mother squeezed her hand so hard it hurt when they said goodbye at the airlock. The promise is, you will be safe. They just want to talk. They need to see you. They need to understand. On the far side of the human bench, Mina Okafede watches the hall with the discipline of long practice. Her diplomatic training sits under her skin like an extra skeleton, holding her upright even when her stomach twists. She tracks the movements of major delegations, the flowing robes of the Thamori League representatives, the still, ink-black carapaces of the Khorathi Combine, the luminous threads of the Seluvar Continuum's envoys. Councillor Shai'leph's body, a semi-fluid column in a containment field, ripples with soft green reflections as it studies its data display. Mina knows Shai'leph's color shifts, enough to see tension there, too. The Khorathi, as always, are harder to read. They have perfected stillness as a political weapon. Amber light swirls higher as the hall's orchestrator chimes for attention. The dome dims. A single spotlight lances down to a platform at the chamber's center, where Praetor Vulketh of the Khorathi Combine takes its place. Khorathi bodies are built like armored spears. Vulketh's exoskeletal plates are polished to a mirror black. Faint bioluminescent sigils creep along its arms and vanish beneath ceremonial cloth. Its eyes are a flat, pearly white that reflects the hall. An attendant projects the proposed statute behind it, translated into 100 scripts. Merciful Resolution Standard, it reads in human letters. Vulketh's voice, carried by the translation mesh, lands in every ear in whatever language fits best. It chooses something close to old courtroom oratory for humans, and the phrasing has been carefully calculated to sound solemn rather than cruel. Honored assembly, it begins. Our shared realm stands at a precipice. Resources thin, populations swell. We rely on fragile logistic streams to keep every breathing mouth fed, every mind inhabited, every cell supplied. We have all witnessed, on our worlds, the consequence of inaction. Images blossom in the air. Overcrowded arcologies on distant planets. Assembly lines of care drones. Hospital bays crowded with tubes and monitors. Every civilization represented here has struggled with the question of those who cannot, and will never, contribute in proportion to the burden they place upon their kin. Those born into unending pain. Those with bodies or minds so broken that every day is torment. We have all, in our own ways, sought to ease them. On many benches, heads bow, or equivalent gestures flicker. Memories stir, of surgical wards, of clinics where hard decisions get made far from public view. The display shifts. Charts appear. Graphs of energy expenditure. care hours counted, productivity curves sagging under cumulative weight. The Khorathi have done their homework. They have attached metrics to what most like to leave in shadows. The Merciful Resolution Standard, Vulketh continues, simply takes what many of us already understand in our medical ethics and applies it, clearly, compassionately, across all member states. It acknowledges that to prolong a life of irreversible suffering, when that life can offer nothing but need, is not kindness, it is cruelty. In the human bench, Yonah's fingers dig into her armrest hard enough to make the servos whine. She looks up at the holograms, now swirling into existence above the central platform. They show bodies, some alien, some human, twisted spines, missing limbs, respiratory support rigs. Statistical overlays blink beside each, projected lifespan, resource use, probability curves, pre-labeled with red bars that read non-contributory. Yonah sees herself there in an instant, even before the system pulls an archival image that resembles her at age 7. Her head lolls more in that one. The chair is bulkier. She remembers the therapist who took the photo for a case study. Next to her, Mahir feels his throat close. He knows the assembly expected resistance from humans. He also knows their staff must have combed public databases for examples. It is one thing to debate ethics. It is another to see a familiar face, younger, stripped of context, and turned into a data point. His fingers, out of sight beneath the bench, curl into a fist. In the Selivar bench, Shai'leph's field shifts from green to a troubled teal. It watches the human delegation's biometric scroll along a private sidebar. Heart rates spiking. Stress markers climbing. It watches Yonah's image on the shared display, then glances at the actual Yonah, who stares back with burning eyes. On Mina's sub-audible channel, urgent signals from Earth flicker past. Requests for updates, legal advisories, soft threats from trade partners. She filters them, focuses on what is happening here. Vulketh raises one clawed hand for emphasis. Under the proposed standard, every member civilization will be required to identify individuals whose functional capacity falls beyond a defined threshold of irreversibility and suffering. Those individuals will be granted a dignified, painless transition. Their families will be supported through the process. This is not extermination. It is an end to needless agony across all worlds. It pauses, letting that sink in. The hall's ambient light stabilizes into a steady gold, the color of bureaucratic resolve. In return, we stabilize resource flows. We free medical systems to focus on those with potential for full participation. We prevent the guilt that comes from watching loved ones suffer decade after decade for no purpose. Murmurs swell. Some delegates nod. Others shift uneasily. The human bench is still. Mina glances sideways and sees Mahir's jaw working. He has practiced his response for days. He has consulted ethicists, community leaders, the Unbroken Initiative back home. None of that fully prepared him for the reality of this moment. When the orchestrator's chime invites counter-arguments, Mahir stands. The hall's lenses hone in on him. His image rises above the platform, framed against an Earth flag and the slowly revolving Sol. "Honored colleagues," he begins, aware of every recorder trained on him. "I speak for the Solace Diarchy, for Earth and our kin. I have listened carefully to the Praetor's words. I recognize the pressures we all face, but there is a dangerous assumption under this proposal that I must challenge." He gestures, and the holograms pause on an image of a human child in a hospital bed, strung with tubes. "The assumption," he says, "is that suffering and value travel together, that a body which struggles is a life not worth living, that if someone cannot lift their own weight, cannot work in your factories, cannot fight in your wars, then their existence is an injustice that we must correct through death." He feels Yonah's eyes on his back. He remembers another hall, decades ago, full of angry citizens arguing over how much public money to devote to inclusive infrastructure. He remembers a smaller girl in a chair in that room, watching the powerful debate her worth. He built his political life on that memory. "On my world," he says, "we have been down this road. We had regimes that declared some bodies useless, some minds too weak to deserve care. They spoke of mercy then, too. They charted resource curves and spoke of quality of life, and they committed horrors that still scar our history. Some in the hall shift uncomfortably. Humanity is notorious for invoking its bloody past. Mahir goes on. We chose, slowly, painfully, to reject that. We chose to say, value is not productivity. Value is not efficiency. Value is the unique combination of perspective, connection, and potential that every person carries. Sometimes that potential is not in what they can lift, but in how they change those around them. He looks directly at Praetor Vulketh's impassive face. Our disabled citizens are not a burden we tolerate. They are part of who we are. They are scientists, like Laleh Monterro, whose early mobility limits led her to spend long hours with telescope data that others neglected, and who discovered the first anomalies of the Helian Rift. They are veterans like Tobias, who lost his sight defending our borders and discovered he could hear patterns in sensor noise that no machine, no untrained ear, could detect. They are children like Yonah Benami, whom you have reduced here to a spreadsheet entry, but who has a mind sharp enough to parse your statutes and see the trap you are laying for us. He lets his gaze sweep the hall. We are not unique. I am sure every one of your worlds has similar stories, if you choose to see them. The hall's light bands shift toward a more agitated amber. On the Yggdrasi heritage tech running particular analysis clusters, an uptick in emotional resonance flags the moment as significant. Vulketh inclines its head. No one doubts your sentimentality, Representative Rafiq, but sentiment does not power life support. Emotion does not grow food. Mahir's temper flares, but he reins it in. You speak of freeing resources, he replies. Let me ask. Free them for what? So we may produce more, expand further, automate faster, until only the flawless remain? If that is your aim, know this. Humans will not participate. A low, electric noise ripples through the hall. Mina feels her pulse pound. She glances at the diplomatic channel where cautious advisors back home are already reacting. Mahir has just stepped over the line they agreed he would only approach. Vulketh's voice cools. Representative, perhaps you misunderstand. Membership in this assembly carries obligations. The standard is not an attack on your sovereignty. It is a shared ethic for a shared crisis. Refusal to implement it would mean you are unwilling to bear your fair share of hardships. That has consequences. Shai'leph speaks up then, its contained form flickering more brightly. Praetor Vulketh, may I inquire about your underlying models? It says, its tone, a careful, measured tone that the Selavar use when stepping into conflict. Speak, Vulketh allows. You focus on resource expenditure, Shai'leph says. But your equations reduce lived experience to crude proxies. Many of our own citizens who met your criteria, on paper, later produced profound works of art or insights that changed our understanding of mind and matter. How does your standard account for delayed or non-quantifiable contributions? Vulketh's plates flex in what passes for amusement. We are not forbidding care for all impairments, Counselor. The standard is clear. Only those with irreversible, severe losses, whose neural parameters fall beneath defined thresholds. The thresholds are yours, Mahir breaks in. Imposed on us, on bodies and minds you do not understand. The orchestrator chime thrums, calling for order. Voices rise. Some delegations transmit support to Mahir's console in furtive bursts. Others send curt condemnations. In the midst of that, Yonah's image appears again on the central display. This time it is current, a live feed, cropped tightly on her face. She sees herself there and freezes. An assembly ethicist from a mid-tier delegation gestures toward the projection. If I may, they say, we asked this young human here to illustrate the kind of life under discussion. Yonah Benami, would you say your daily existence is free of suffering, of limits? Her translator whispers the words in her ear. She knows, vaguely, that agreeing she suffers could be twisted into consent, that denying it would erase the hard days she has had. In her chest there is a pressure that feels like a star collapsing. She chooses the simplest truth she can access. I would say, she replies, looking straight at the lenses, that it's my life, not yours. The hall quiets for a moment. Even the ambient color seems to dim. Someone coughs. Someone else hisses in a language the translator ignores. Vulketh seizes on the moment, and if we could promise you a painless release from that struggle, it presses. If your family could know you are at peace, and that your energy now feeds others who might flourish beyond what you can? Yonah thinks of her mother's hand at the airlock, of the way her father's voice broke talking about scholarships. She thinks of the night she lay awake angry at her own spine, cursing the stubborn cells that would not cooperate. She thinks of the girls in her peer group, some of whom had said in very dark hours that they wished they had never been born. I don't want to vanish to make your graphs look neat, she says. If I go, it should be my decision, not a law, not a quota. Her voice quivers toward the end. She hates that, but the words are out in the world now. Several cameras cut away, as if embarrassed by her emotion. But the human delegation's private feed captures it all. The debate runs for hours. Arguments loop in circles. Alien ethicists trade carefully groomed atrocities from their own histories as cautionary tales in both directions. For every world that learned to extend life at any cost, another chose controlled endings to avoid what they called the long twilight of decay. The hall's processors crunch probabilities. The outcome is almost certain before the first speaker finishes. When the orchestrator finally calls for the vote, the ambient bands have settled into a resigned gold. Colored lights blossom above each bench as delegations cast their decision. Green for assent, red for dissent, blue for abstention. At the human bench, Mina's finger hovers over the red icon for a fraction of a second, knowing that this choice will echo for generations. She presses. A single point of red appears above them. Shai'leph's field takes on a faint red core. A handful of other small delegations follow. Green dominates the dome. It is not close. The Merciful Resolution Standard passes with a heavy majority. On the projection, the text updates. Now binding, it declares. Mahir's stomach drops. A quiet, private channel opens in his mind, where the Unbroken Initiative's core team waits back on Earth, listening in real time. Does this mean, one of them sends, that my son is illegal now? He does not answer. Praetor Vulketh's voice comes one last time. We will, of course, provide templates and support for implementation, it says. We know some of you come from cultures reluctant to see suffering clearly. We will help you. The word help hangs like a blade. Outside Orialis Spire, in the cold, star-crowded dark, little changes. Ships dock and undock. Habitats turn. But in the psychic geography of the galaxy, a line has been drawn. When the session recesses, the delegates spill into corridors of glass and light. Mina guides Yonah's chair along a quieter side passage, away from the media swarm. Mahir walks beside them, eyes unfocused. Yonah stares straight ahead. Somewhere deep inside, a slow-burning fuse has caught. Mina touches Mahir's arm. They will expect a compromise, she murmurs. They will assume we will make it look like we obey. Mahir exhales a bitter laugh. Then they do not know us as well as they think. Behind them, unnoticed, Shai'leph watches from the transparent wall, its form a pale flicker against the starfield. It notes the human delegation's posture, the way Yonah's hands shake, the way Mahir's shoulders have set, not in defeat, but in a kind of terrible resolve. It transmits a short, encrypted message to an address long buried in Selivar archives. It contains no commentary, only a copy of the vote log and a single line of metadata tagged. They will not bend. On Earth, daylight spills over oceans and deserts that have known too much change in too few centuries. The Solace Diarchy's Central Assembly Chamber in Nairobi fills with voices. Some are physically present in tiered seats. Others appear as full-bodied projections, hovering above their desks. Remote habitats from Luna to Ceres dial in. The vote from Orialis plays on a central screen. The count, the moment the standard goes green. In living rooms, in clinics, in rehabilitation centers, and biotech labs, people stop what they are doing and watch. In a pediatric ward in Sao Paulo orbit, a cluster of parents stand over their children's beds. The translation overlay follows the alien voices. Someone claps a hand over their mouth. Someone else swears. At a repurposed warehouse in Lagos, wheelchair basketball players halt mid-drill, chairs squeaking on the polished floorboards. One of them, a tall man with a spinal brace, looks up and says, "So that's it then? We're the problem." His coach, whose left arm is a smooth carbon composite, spits on the floor. "We've always been the problem. They just finally put it in writing." The Unbroken Initiative's core circle logs into an emergency call. Faces fill the grid. Scarred, smooth, young, old, with devices, without. Laleh Monterro appears in one tile, hair pulled back, sitting in a lab filled with humming equipment. Tobias Nidor appears in another, white cane leaning against his chair even though he is at home and knows every inch of his living room by sound. Their moderator, a woman whose breath is carried by a compact chest unit, clears her throat. "We knew this was coming," she says, "but not like this." At the head of the governmental table, Mahir appears, still in his assembly formal wear. The delay between Orialis and Earth is accounted for by the relay chain. They have synchronized this call so his report lands at the exact start of this meeting. "You've all seen it," he begins. "I won't rehash the debate. The fact is, the standard is now binding in the eyes of the Assembly on all member states. That includes us." Murmurs crackle through the grid. "What does binding mean here?" Laleh asks, her voice precise. "They do not command our bodies. They do not occupy our hospitals. For now it means sanctions," Mahir says. "Trade restrictions. Access to shared defense nets curtailed. Over time, they can escalate. Inspections of our care systems. Seizure of people for relocation to their facilities." They were not subtle about that in side meetings. Tobias shakes his head slowly, listening to the undertone of Mahir's voice more than his words. "They are confident we will fold before it gets that far," he says softly. "They think we need them more than they need us." "Do we?" asks someone off screen. Silence stretches. "We need the antimatter shipments from the Thamori," says a minister whose role demands pessimism. "We need the Khorathi crystal lattice tech for our microfusion clinics. We need access to the Continuum's archives for weather modeling. Cut off from that, our outer habitats will suffer. And if we implement this standard," interrupts a mother whose child sits on her lap, drooling cheerfully onto a bib, "what happens to my boy?" Everyone else quiets. Mahir looks directly into the pickup. "If we implement it faithfully," he says, "he dies. So do thousands of others. Millions, if you count long-term projections." His honesty lands like a slap even though they all knew it. Laleh leans forward, fingers sliding across a control on her chair to adjust her posture. "You sent us that encrypted briefing after your last deep session with the Continuum," she says. "About the contingency plans. Were you serious?" Eyes turned toward her. Mahir glances away, jaw tight. "Yes," he says. "Project Exodus Lumenreach was not a thought experiment. We have been quietly investing in it for years." A few in the grid gasp. Many had suspected something, but not the scale implied by that name. Laleh continues, more for the benefit of those who have not been looped in than her own. For those who aren't familiar, the Heliand Rift is a space-time anomaly at the galactic edge. We thought at first it was a hazard, a tear in the fabric, but the readings suggested structure. Layers, portals, almost. We could not make sense of it until we started piecing together Yggdrasi fragments from abandoned relics. Dr. Helam Oro's name flickers in a corner of her display, a silent acknowledgement of the Yggdrasi descendant who risked their standing to share precursor data. "With their help," Laleh says, "we modeled a drive that could, in principle, couple to the rift's geometry and open a one-way corridor out of our galactic well, the Aeternum Engine. It is not complete." She glances around her lab, at the half-built rings and shimmering field cages. "But it is not a fantasy either. In other words," says Tobias, "you're talking about leaving, not figuratively, literally leaving this galaxy's political and physical structure." "That was always the endpoint of the plan," Mahir says quietly. "If we hit a moral wall we could not climb over or break, we wanted an option beyond simply enduring. I hoped we would never have to use it." The minister from earlier snorts. Leaving the galaxy, she repeats. With what? Half a dozen ships and a prayer? We'd be condemning billions to starve here, while a lucky few drift in the dark. We are developing a capacity far beyond that, Kazuko Inoue says, her voice joining the call. She appears in a tile beside Laleh, grease stains on her cheeks, black hair pulled back in a band. Behind her looms a curved structure of metal and field emitters that seems to bend light. ISS Dawnbringer carries the prototype Aeternum Engine frame, she explains. At the Peregrine array, we have been assembling a support lattice that, if completed, can channel the engine's effect across a vast volume. Think of it as a bridge in between points, just not between stars, but between galactic neighborhoods. We call it the Lumenreach Bridge. And you think you can finish this under sanctions, with the assembly breathing down our necks? Asks a skeptical elder in the grid. Kazuko smiles without humor. I didn't say it would be easy. I said it was not impossible. Arguments erupt then, in overlapping threads. Some plead for an attempt at compromise with the assembly, a softer application of the standard, maybe token enforcement. Others condemn any capitulation as a betrayal of their most vulnerable. Someone suggests delaying. Someone else suggests legalistic sabotage. Redefine severe until the standard applies to almost no one. Another voice, older, whispers that they could fake data for the inspectors. Tobias listens, his fingers moving on the surface of his chair in tiny patterns that map the ebb and flow of voices. There is a rhythm under it that he recognizes, the rhythm of a group trying to find a line they can all live with. He does not hear it. All he hears is the way some voices crack when they say, "My child." Finally he speaks. "Look," he says, "when I lost my sight, I went from being a useful soldier to a statistic. If the Khorathi had written my file, it would have read like those charts in the hall. High cost, low productivity. If my commander had had a law like this, he might have felt justified in putting a gun to my head and calling it mercy. Instead, my people dragged me home. We rebuilt my life. We gave me scanners and sound maps and told me to figure out what I could do that no one else could." His hand taps the table in a slow beat. "And I did. I hear patterns in sensor noise now that saved lives during the last border flare. You all know that. I am not unique. Every time we chose to keep someone like me around, we got surprises. Not always world-shaking ones. Sometimes just small joys. A painting, a joke, a new way to understand gravity." He turns his face toward where he feels Mahir must be on the feed. If we choose to comply, even halfway, we are choosing to cut off those surprises at the root. We are saying, our fear of scarcity matters more than their right to exist. That will mark us, as surely as any genocide did. The word lands hard. Mahir feels the weight of every pair of eyes. He had hoped someone else would say it first. Now that Tobias has, he can no longer pretend there is a middle path. "I will not sign an order to kill our own people to satisfy an alien calculus," he says. "I am done pretending we can please everyone. If we stand firm, we will suffer. Our trade routes will shrink. Our outer colonies will struggle. But we will not have to look at our children and explain why they died for efficiency's sake." He draws a slow breath. "I propose this. We refuse the standard openly. We begin immediate, accelerated work on Project Exodus Lumenreach as our escape hatch if enforcement escalates. We invest what remains of our standing in building alliances with those small species who are choking under the same ethic but lack the means to defy it. And we make sure our disabled citizens lead this effort, not as symbols, but as architects and commanders." On the grid, some faces go pale, some nod, relief showing through fear. The vote in the chamber is not formal. There is no binding resolution. But as the discussion wears on, as Laleh lays out the engineering requirements, as Kazuko shows schematics of the Dawnbringer's skeleton, as Tobias sketches strategic scenarios for blockades and misdirections, a consensus forms. By the time the call ends, the choice has been made, even if no one has written it down. The Solace diarchy will not implement the standard. They will, instead, gamble the future of their species on a half-finished bridge to nowhere. The galaxy notices quickly. First come the formal protests, messages from distant capitals expressing disappointment and concern. Then the bureaucratic screws turn. Access to certain markets is temporarily paused pending compliance review. Shared research databases flag human logins for secondary vetting. On Orialis Spire, corridors that were neutral yesterday become tricky terrain. Mina feels the difference in how doors open, in how staffers' eyes slide away from her, in how meetings are rescheduled due to unavoidable conflicts. Shai'leph meets her in a small observation nook that looks out over the station's inner gardens. Its containment field is tinted the soft blue of apology. They will not take this kindly, it says, without preamble. I had gathered as much, Mina replies dryly. You must understand the fear beneath this policy, Shai'leph continues. More to itself than to her. Long-lived civilizations accumulate the shadows of their own mistakes. They look for simple rules to avert calamity. Do not prolong unproductive suffering sounds wise when you have watched planets drown in their own exhaust. And yet, when they define suffering, Mina says, somehow it looks very much like inconvenient bodies. Shai'leph's form ripples with a hint of shame. I argued as much, it says. We were outvoted. The Khorathi hold more influence than they admit. Are you here to pressure me? Mina asks. Ask us to reconsider? Deliver threats in a softer tone? No. The response is immediate. I am here to warn you. Enforcement orders are already being drafted. The term on the documents is compliance facilitation, but they authorize the seizure of individuals from non-compliant worlds for protective relocation. Your hospitals would be prime targets. So would your rehabilitation centers. Your schools. Mina's hands tighten on the railing. How long? Less time than you think. More time than you fear, Shai'leph answers elliptically. It takes cycles to move fleets and build consensus. But some commanders have been given discretion. They may act unilaterally under the guise of humanitarian rescue even before a formal mission is announced. Mina stares at the floating garden biome below, where delicate feathers of alien grasses wave in an artificially generated breeze. What would you do if you were us? She asks. Shai'leph's core dims. We are not you, it says. Our people solved this question differently, for better and worse. Sometimes we envy your capacity for outrage. That's not an answer. It is the only honest one I have. I can give you, however, something else. It extends a tendril of energy toward her slate. A file transfers, encrypted with Selovar markers. This contains projections, fleet deployment timelines, gaps in the surveillance web. Use them or don't. I never gave them to you. Why? Mina asks. Why risk your standing for us? Shai'leph shifts hue, as if recalling something private. On my homeworld, it says, there was once a child like your Yonah. Our elders argued that its condition meant it would know only pain. They chose to end its life early. We have since learned more about minds. When I encountered your data on neuroplasticity, I realized we likely killed someone who might have become extraordinary. That thought does not let me rest. Consider this my attempt at balancing a very old ledger. Mina looks at it for a long moment, then nods. Thank you, she says simply. As she turns to go, Shai'leph adds, Representative Okafede, be careful with your colleagues from the Thamori League. Some of them are as trapped as you. Some are already negotiating how many of their own to sacrifice for calmer trade relations. I appreciate the warning, she says. Do not, Shai'leph replies, mistake my sympathy for safety. In human space, the first blockade arrives quietly. Cargo ships bound for outer mining colonies find their lanes temporarily closed for inspection. Khorathi patrol cruisers loiter just off legal borders. Escort requests are delayed due to staffing shortages. The Solace Diarchy issues formal protests. The Assembly sends back bland assurances that no one is targeting them specifically, that these are routine adjustments for supply chain security. But then a human medical transport, the Asha Sun, encounters a Khorathi patrol in a corridor previously unmonitored. The patrol hails them with clipped courtesy and requests boarding to verify compliance with new intercivilizational care standards. On the Asha Sun's bridge, Captain Lee curses under his breath. His manifest includes a ward of children en route to a rehabilitation consortium on Mars orbit. Several are on life support. All fall within the Standard's radial charts. He knows what this is. He also knows the strength of the customs woven into his bones. The Solus Diarchy has trained its captains to avoid escalation. They are to be polite, to avoid giving any excuse for violence. The trade minister's standing orders play in his head. Cooperate where possible, stall where not, and get out alive. He opens a channel. His face appears on the Khorathi flagship's view screen, filtered through translation meshes. "This is Captain Lee, of human vessel Asha Sun," he says. "We are on a medical mercy mission with fragile passengers. Any boarding could jeopardize their health. I must decline your request." On the Khorathi bridge, Commander Shrieked bares its mandibles in what, among its own kind, signals patience running thin. The Merciful Resolution Standard requires cross-verification of records, it says. "We will ensure minimal disruption. If you cooperate, there will be no harm." "And if we do not?" Lee asks. Shrieked tilts its head. "Then we must assume you are hiding violations," it says. "Standard protocol permits us to seize questionable cases for evaluation in our own facilities. Surely you do not wish to impede mercy." Behind Lee, his first officer mutters something unprintable. Lee squeezes his eyes shut for a heartbeat. Then he orders a full-spectrum broadcast. Suddenly, the live exchange is visible on open channels across several systems. The faces of frail children in the ward appear, hovering in space beside his feed. Parents clutch their hands. Nurses hover at their tables. "This is the Asha Sun," Lee announces to whoever is watching. "We are being asked to hand over our patients to foreign custody in the name of a law we did not author for a mercy they did not request. The Khorathi do not like being seen. Their code prefers neat operations carried out under sanitized terms." Shrieked feels the eyes of other worlds on its plated back. It hesitates. Its orders give it authority to seize, but not at the cost of public relations disasters this early in the enforcement process. "We will waive inspection in this case," it says grudgingly. "This time, be advised, Captain Lee, that continued non-compliance will have consequences." The Asha Sun continues on. The feed of that exchange circulates through human networks, then leaks out to sympathetic nodes in other civilizations. The phrase mercy inspection becomes a bitter joke in activist circles. In a loft in Accra, Yonah watches the recording on replay, jaw clenched. She has been home for weeks now, since the assembly session. Her chair sits by a window overlooking a bustling spaceport. Ships rise and fall in glittering arcs. The muscles in her legs ache from their daily strain program. Her lungs feel tight from arguing with too many family members about how much she can handle. On her slate, messages from newly formed solidarity groups ping. Disabled communities from Thamori worlds, quiet sympathizers among hybrid colonies. They share stories, fears, strategies. She is quickly becoming a focal point whether she wants to or not. She opens a new document and starts to write the speech she wishes she had given on Orialis. Meanwhile, in the far reaches of human space, the Peregrine array blooms with raw potential. It floats at the Heliand Rift's fringe, a loose constellation of stations and scaffolds lit by the shimmer of wild gravity. The rift looks like a tear in a painting, a stretched region of distorted stars where light bends at unnatural angles. Within a central platform, ISS Dawnbringer is docked like a knife in a sheath. Its hull gleams dull silver, broken by the outlines of enormous ring structures that trace the spine of the ship. The Aeternum Engine, still mostly fetal, curls within those rings. Kazuko Inoue stands, or rather braces, in the main engineering bay, hands on a haptic frame. Around her, machinery drones. The air tastes of metallic dust and ozone. Laleh Monterro's voice filters through her earpiece from a nest of consoles across the bay. Laleh's chair is locked into a specialized rig that allows her to manipulate multi-dimensional visualizations with small finger movements and eye tracking. Node 3.4 is out of phase, Laleh says. If you don't adjust, when we drive the main lattice, it will resonate with the wrong harmonic and snap. "I can't get replacement crystalline abouts from the Thamori anymore," Kazuko mutters. "We're already improvising with human-grown analogs," If I tune too far, I could destabilize the whole ring. Then don't tune too far, Laleh replies. Tune just enough. Kazuko laughs, a short bark. You should come down here and do it yourself. You built the hands, Laleh shoots back. I built the map. We need both. They work like that for hours. The dance of an on-site engineer and a mind that sees patterns in distorted space-time the way others see faces in clouds. Laleh's body would not last a single shift in the low-gravity open spans of the array. Kazuko's brain does not enjoy high-dimensional geometry. Together, they do what neither could alone. Throughout the array, human crews hustle, bolting together massive field projectors, calibrating emitters, testing the nodes of the Lumenreach Bridge. The design looks more like an art installation than traditional engineering. Spirals within spirals, arcs that seem to lean into invisible currents. On a wall screen, a timer counts the estimated safe window before the rift's current configuration shifts unpredictably. It ticks down in smug, steady decimals. In a secure comms chamber deep within Dawnbringer, Tobias Endur runs his fingers along a bank of tactile interfaces. He likes this room. The sound here is dense with signals and subtle machine hums. He listens to the faint fluctuations in the local gravitational field, to the hiss and pop of distant ship engines. To most, it is noise. To him, it is a symphony that telegraphs motion. He detects the Khorathi vanguard ships before the automated systems do. A momentary dip in a particular high-frequency component. A slight time slip in the station's internal clocks as distant mass transitions through warped corridors. His body recognizes it before his analytical mind catches up. Kazuko, he calls over a local link. We're about to have company. How many? She asks. He cocks his head, listening harder. A scouting force. Not the main armada, but enough teeth to hurt us if they bite. He pings Mahir's channel. The human leader is at that moment inside a secure bunker on Earth, in a room lined with old wood paneling, more for symbolism than defense. The surface of his desk is already a constellation of icons, representing crises vying for his attention. Let me guess, Mahir says when he sees Tobias's ID. Our Khorathi friends have decided unannounced visits are appropriate. Scouts only, Tobias reports. But they are close enough to make trouble if they put their minds to it. Or whatever they use in place of minds. Mahir nods slowly. We're approaching a decision point, he says. Dawnbringer launched early construction on the bridge because we hoped to buy time under cover of deniability. That veil is shrinking. We always knew they'd smell the heat eventually, Tobias replies. His fingertips tap the console in that slow rhythm again. The question is, will we be ready when they arrive with the big guns? In Orialis Spire, Mina walks a knife edge between cooperation and disruption. By day, she sits in committee hearings about transition metrics, listening as Khorathi expert elevated ethicists lecture smaller worlds on how to identify irreversible impairment without triggering local superstitions. She asks polite questions, raises carefully calibrated objections. She plays the game enough to keep her access. By night, she slips through the station's less monitored segments, using human-coded cloaking protocols to access mid-tier networks. She befriends staffers from minor delegations, buying them drinks of whatever their species uses to relax, sharing stories of messy human culture, sliding in questions about enforcement timetables, fleet dispersal, logistics vulnerabilities. She meets, more than once, in shadowed alcoves with Thamori junior officers, whose 4 delicate arms tremble when they talk about the orders coming from their high command, to cooperate fully with Khorathi enforcement in exchange for protection. They have promised to share their mercy tech with us, one confesses, eyes dark with shame. They say we can pre-select which of our citizens go. They will allow us to choose who is beyond hope, as if hope is theirs to judge. You don't have to go along with it, Mina says. The Thamori gives a bitter trill. We are not your species. We do not have a secret engine at the edge of known space. Mina says nothing to that. She is not at liberty to share all the secrets she carries. In a small repurposed communications booth, Yonah's avatar hovers above a holoprojector. She is not physically present on Orialis, but her code has found its way in. Mina watches the flickering image with a sense of surreal pride. A teenager from Earth, their younger case study, is now ghosting into the assembly's digital heart. "You're sure you want to do this?" Mina asks. "I'm sure I'm tired of them talking about us without us," Yonah replies. "You said there are unused broadcast channels woven into the station's emergency alert system. If we can reroute some of that, we can override their curated feeds for at least a few minutes, right?" "On paper," Mina says. "In reality, you will have to fight through layers of redundancy and security monitors. If they catch a trace of your signal, they will close every door you might ever want to open again." Yonah shrugs.
"If they win, they'll kill me anyway. If we leave, I go with you, but leave behind a whole galaxy full of people like me."
Either way, playing nice doesn't seem like it gives me much. Her tone is flat, but Mina hears the fear under it. Not of death, exactly, but of irrelevance. "Besides," Yonah adds, "you said we need a spark, something to make the rest of them see. This isn't hypothetical. They made me a case study. Fine, I'll be one, but on my own terms." Months pass in a rapid, compressed blur for humanity. On other worlds, time flows as usual. On Earth, days feel like stacked knives. The Khorathi Combine tightens the trade screws. Some allied species follow out of habit or fear. Ships go missing in corridors that used to be safe. Sanction lists fill with human names. In response, the Solus diarchy accelerates everything. Factories retool to build life support modules, modular power plants, agricultural biomes that can be bolted onto ships. Orbital docks extend additional arms to handle the sudden demand. Civil planners divide populations into tranches. Who will have priority passage on the first wave of the Lumenreach fleet? Who will remain in the galaxy to hold ground? And, perhaps, seed later departures. The conversations those lists spark are raw and ugly. Why should outer colony residents be left behind? One representative demands in a diarchy session. "We're the ones who kept your homeworld lit, because their transit time to the rift is longer," a logistics officer answers. "We are triaging distance." "Triaging," someone repeats, half laughing, half crying. We adopt their language while claiming to defy their ethics. At the Unbroken Initiative's headquarters, they adopt a policy. No prioritization based solely on perceived utility. They agonize over criteria. Vulnerability? That would put disabled people first, a satisfying inversion that also leads to the risk of building a fleeing society without enough infrastructure skills. Skill sets? That would risk reproducing the very productivity biases they resist. In the end, they adopt a hybrid model. Every ship must carry a mixed community, with mandated quotas for age, ability, cultural background, and profession. No vessel is to go forward as a lifeboat solely for the best and brightest. If that means no ship is optimally efficient, so be it. "This is about who we are," Mahir tells his staff late one night, head in his hands. It is 3 a.m. in Nairobi, and the city outside hums more softly than at midday. If we build a perfect, cruel arc, we might as well stay here and pass the standard. It would be the same choice, painted differently. As the announced date of a full stabilization mission looms the Assembly's sanitized term for the Armada being assembled under Khorathi guidance, the work at the Heliand Rift reaches a fever pitch. Dawnbringer's Aeternum Engine is complete enough for a test spin. The Lumenreach Bridge has most of its nodes in place. The task now is calibration, syncing the engine's field with the rift's shifting geometry so that the corridor, once opened, will lead somewhere survivable, instead of shredding the fleet into quantum mist. Laleh's world narrows to numbers and luminous shapes. She sleeps in snatches in a cot in the data bay, dream and work blur. She wakes sometimes with a new insight drawn straight from a nightmare of falling between stars. One dawn cycle, Kazuko finds her weeping quietly at her console, hands motionless. "You all right?" Kazuko asks, knowing the question is inadequate. Laleh exhales shakily. "I just realized," she says, "that if we miscalculate, we could tear not just ourselves apart, but part of the rift structure. We've never fully understood what this anomaly does to surrounding spacetime. It might hold something together downstream, or keep something out. We could unmake something we didn't even know existed." Kazuko leans against the console. "There's a chance the road we're building leads off a cliff," she says. "Yes, And you still want to finish paving it. Laleh lets out a bitter laugh. I want to, not have to. But every time I look at the videos from Earth at Khorathi patrols hovering outside hospitals, at disabled kids being hustled into underground safe houses like contraband. I know. This is the only road we can walk and still call ourselves what we claim to be. Kazuko nods slowly. Then we walk it, and we try very hard not to fall. They return to the calculations. On Orialis Spire, the emergency session of the assembly opens under a stormy blue light. The mood bands overhead churn anxiously. The agenda is simple and chilling. Formal censure of the Solace diarchy, authorization of the stabilization mission, delegation of broad enforcement powers to the Khorathi-led task force. Praetor Vulketh stands again on the central platform, flanked this time by holographic renders of docked armadas. Human defiance, it says smoothly, endangers not only their own citizens, but the stability of our shared systems. We cannot permit one recalcitrant member to squander resources on lives that only prolong suffering when those resources could ease the burdens of billions. Murmurs rise. Some delegations applaud. Others remain diplomatically neutral. A few shift in their seats, uneasy with the scale of steel woven into Vulketh's words. Mahir appears as a projection above the human bench. He could not come in person. Traveling to Orialis now would be tantamount to walking into a cell. His holographic form is to scale and slightly translucent, standing between Mina and the empty chair that once held Yonah. He asks for the floor. The orchestrator, bound by procedural rules not yet eroded, gives it to him. You speak of burdens, he says. Let me tell you what burdens we carry now. I see mothers packing their disabled children's bags, not for school, but for underground clinics, where they hope no foreign inspector will find them. I see engineers with spinal injuries working double shifts to build life support systems for ships that may never launch because they refuse to see their kin marched into sterilized death chambers. I see teenagers who use assistive devices learning encryption and counter-surveillance because they know their very existence is now contraband. He sweeps his gaze across the hall. We do not ask you to share that burden. We ask only that you let us carry it in the way we choose. Without demanding, we lighten our load by throwing people overboard. Vulketh's claws tap the platform. This melodrama is unnecessary, it says. No one is demanding you murder your citizens, only that you recognize when further treatment inflicts more pain than it alleviates. You are not equipped to define pain for us, Mahir replies. And certainly not equipped to weigh it against joy. He straightens. We will not implement your standard. We will not hand over our disabled citizens for your so-called mercy. If you choose to respond with force, know this. We will not fight you ship for ship. That would be suicide. We will simply leave. We have been building the means to do so at the Heliand Rift. If the enforcement armada advances, we will activate it. We will remove ourselves from your reach. The hall goes very still. Even those who dismissed rumors of human extragalactic ambitions cannot ignore the certainty in Mahir's voice. You cannot be serious, says a delegate from a prosperous mid-rim polity. To abandon the entire shared network? All this history? These connections? What good are connections that require us to betray our core? Mahir answers. We will not live in a house that demands the sacrifice of our weakest for rent. Laughter ripples in a few benches, nervous and scornful at once. The idea of physically leaving the galaxy has long been a philosophical parable among older races, not a practical option. Shai'leph, however, does not laugh. Its private feed shows simulations it has run in secret, using bits of data scraped from human research. They point, shockingly, to a small but real chance that the Aeternum Engine could do what humanity claims. If true, then the moral implications are immense. The vote to authorize the stabilization mission passes, as everyone knew it would. As the tally completes, Yonah moves. Her code, smuggled in bits and pieces onto Orialis infrastructure over weeks, awakens fully. Scripts she and a handful of human and alien hackers wrote snake through the emergency alert system, leaping from node to node, rewriting priorities. For a heartbeat, the entire assembly's feed glitches. Praetor Vulketh's face freezes mid-sentence. Then, the image dissolves. In its place, a new scene blossoms. A hospital room on Earth, filmed from a child's eye view. A nurse with a rainbow tattoo smiles down. A child's laugh, thin but fierce, rises. "This is what you call a burden," a voiceover says. Yonah's voice. "Here is my friend Miri, who uses a ventilator and paints murals with her toes. Here is Rafi, who cannot speak, but can compose music by tapping a sensor with his head. Here is Adim, who screams when he is touched, but calms when he feels water running over his fingers. Images tumble past, lives that do not fit Khorathi charts, messy and vibrant. Here is Tobias." Yonah's voice continues, and an image appears of the blind veteran sitting at a console, fingers dancing over controls. "He hears battles before they happen. He kept me alive when our ship's sensors went out crossing an asteroid field." In another bench, Tobias sits with an earpiece tuned to the assembly feed. Hearing his own name, he stiffens. He did not authorize this particular clip. Then he smiles, just a little. On Orialis, security staff scramble. Alerts flare on admin consoles. Unauthorized broadcast. Source traced, no. Shifting. Masking itself as routine status updates. Yonah's patched-in code exploits the station's assumption that emergency alerts must override ordinary programming. She has relabeled her message as an existential hazard. "If you call this suffering without joy," she says, "come sit with us for a day. If you still think we are better off dead, fine. But do not pretend you are doing us a kindness from a distance." Her face finally appears, in full, not as cropped case study, but as she is now. Older, eyes fierce, chair humming softly beneath her. "Some of you know what it is to be considered waste," she says, "to have your species called inefficient, to have others tell you what your lives are worth. You can go along with this standard and hope they do not turn it on you next, or you can say, no, not in my name." Mina, watching from the human bench, feels a surge of pride so intense it almost knocks her breathless. Praetor Vulketh hisses to its adjutants, mandibles clicking. "Shut it down," it snarls. But the alert hierarchy is stubborn. It takes long, crucial minutes to find and excise the scripts. By the time the assembly's official feeds regain control, hundreds of worlds have seen Yonah's montage. The footage has already been copied, remixed, distributed across networks. In Thamori underground forums, it plays on loop beside impassioned calls for resistance. In quiet Selivar circles, it becomes an object of study, a kind of ethical shockwave. The authorization for the stabilization mission stands. The Armada is already fueling, but the moral clarity of the vote is gone. In its place, doubt whispers. Out at the Helian Rift, alarms blare as the Khorathi vanguard drops into local space. Lances of compressed plasma flare in the dark, warning shots across the bow of the Peregrine array. On Dawnbringer's bridge, Kazuko grips a railing as the ship shudders gently from distant impacts. They're targeting outlying lattice nodes, Laleh calls from her rig. Her eyes track patterns invisible to most. They don't want to destroy the array. They want to break the bridge. Of course they do, murmurs Mahir from his remote link in the comm pit. His holo stands near the captain's chair, a ghost on his own flagship. "Can we open the corridor now?" asks the ship's captain. "Get who we have and run?" Laleh shakes her head sharply. "The bridge is incomplete," she says. "If we push the Aeternum Engine now, we tear ourselves apart. We need at least the primary ring and the stabilizing cross nodes." "How long?" Mahir demands. "Hours," she answers. "Maybe a day. Definitely not what they're planning to give us." Tobias's voice crackles across the net from his sensor chamber. "I might be able to buy you some of that," he says. "But you're not going to like how." "Tell me," Mahir says. "We've been conservative with the Aeternum Engine's preliminary tests," Tobias explains. "We've kept it at minimal resonance to avoid damaging the bridge. But the Saluvar Sims Shai'leph leaked showed something interesting. If we overdrive the engine in a specific way, before the corridor is fully formed, we can create a localized field of gravitic chaos. Think of it as a smear of confusion. It would scramble any targeting systems relying on precise distance calculations." "And ours?" Kazuko asks dryly. Ours would be heavily compensated for, Tobias says, because Laleh knows the song the engine will sing and can hum along in real time. Laleh snorts. That's a poetic way to say, I will ride a tidal wave of data and hope I don't drown.
What's the risk?
Mahir asks. Tobias's voice softens. We could destabilize the bridge's outer nodes beyond repair, he answers. We could crack Dawnbringer's hull. We could, worst case, trigger a chain reaction in the rift that bends this whole region of space-time in ways we cannot predict. Silence falls. On another channel, reports stream in. More ships are arriving to join the Exodus fleet. Habitat modules disconnecting from asteroid belts. Families boarding transports with shaking hands. They are all converging on the rift under the promise that a path will be there. Mahir sees their faces in his mind. He also sees children being dragged from beds by mercy teams if the Khorathi are allowed to proceed unchecked. He looks at Laleh. Can you do it? He asks. Can you ride that wave and keep us from breaking? She considers for a heartbeat. The weight of every slight to her body. Every time she was told she couldn't climb a set of stairs or cross a rough field. Every time someone apologized for an inconvenience to her parents, more than to her, presses against the inside of her skull. I have been training for this my whole life, she says. Not the math. The improvisation. When your body never does quite what the diagram says it should, you learn to adapt on the fly. Her smile is fierce. Light it up, Tobias. Dawnbringer's core bays hum as the Aeternum Engine powers up beyond any previous run. Rings along the ship's spine begin to glow with a strange inner light. The rift responds, its warps and folds resonating, sending faint ripples through local spacetime. In the comms chamber, a technician gasps as a loose pen leaps off a table and clings to the ceiling. Compensate, Kazuko barks. Local gravity dampers up by 20%. In his chamber, Tobias spreads his fingers over tactile arrays, feeling the shape of the chaos forming. It sounds to his unique senses like a chord massively out of tune, a grating shriek that threatens to split his skull. He forces himself to focus on the underlying rhythm. Khorathi targeting arrays are based on unfolding micro-lensing data, he says. If we add jitter to the timing of their own light, they'll see ghosts where we are, and real ships where we aren't. Laleh's rig tilts as she manually tweaks the engine's control parameters, adjusting phase alignments in microsecond increments. Her screens show twisted geometries, color-coded distances that shift like oil on water. Anchoring node 2.7, she mutters, bridging to 3.1. Tighten here, widen there. No. Not that far there. Her hands move in arcs the interface has never seen before, fingers tracing new commands into the control system's language. Outside, the Khorathi ships fire again. Beams of coherent energy lance toward the bridge's gleaming nodes and slide harmlessly into empty space, their paths bent aside by the nascent distortion field. Sensors on those ships report phantom targets, non-existent platforms, false flare points. Shrieked, commanding from the lead Vanguard ship, snarls. Recalibrate, it orders. Their devices are interfering with our range finding. Increase redundancy. But the more they try to refine their data, the more noise the Aeternum Engine feeds into their assumptions. Their fine-tuned instruments become liabilities. Back on Orialis, assembly monitors spike. Space-time fluctuation alerts blossom on consoles. Shai'leph stares at the readings, its core flickering between awe and terror. They're doing it. It whispers to no one. Praetor Vulketh watches the same graphs and feels something it has rarely known. Fear. Not of physical danger, its ship is far from the rift, but of a loss of control, measured not in ships defecting, but in reality itself, choosing a different alignment. On Earth, people gather in parks and on rooftops at odd hours, staring at the night sky. The Heliand rift, so distant, so small, cannot be seen directly from most vantage points, but sensitive instruments pick up strange ripples in cosmic background radiation. Amateur astronomers share images with captions like, "They're going." Inside Dawnbringer, alarms shriek as stresses push metal and composite close to their limits. Panels bend minutely, support struts groan. "Laleh," Kazuko calls, "you're burning the ring assemblies too hard. They won't hold this load for long. I know, Laleh grits out, sweat beads on her forehead. Her hands tremble not from fatigue alone, but from the mental strain of holding the pattern in her mind. Tell me when they reach 30% of projected failure threshold. That's our drop point. 25. Someone at a secondary console calls. 28. 30. Hold there, Laleh orders. Maintain. Tobias, you have your fog. Copy, he says. His fingers blur as he orchestrates jammers and decoy drones, slotting them into the swirling distortion like instruments in an orchestra. On Orialis Spire, Mina stands before a public terminal, watching the shared feed. Around her, alien delegates crowd in, faces lit by pulsing graphs. No one has seen space-time behave like this since Yggdrasi days. She feels her slate vibrate. A short text from Mahir. We're lighting the torch. Be ready. She does not know for what exactly, but she braces herself anyway. At the solar boundary, the stabilization armada arrives to find its navigation system stuttering. Hypercorridor gateways flash unstable warnings. Ships designed to move with mechanical precision suddenly misalign with their own coordinates. Anomaly propagating from Helliant sector, a Khorathi officer reports to Vulketh. Attempting to compensate. Vulketh glares at the display. We do not have time for this, it hisses. Push through. They must not escape. Back at the rift, the Lumenreach Bridge's nodes thrum with energy. Field lines weave into a towering, invisible arch, connecting Dawnbringer's engine to regions of space-time where normal physics frays. The corridor's mouth begins to open. It is not a hole so much as a region where distance stops, meaning what it used to. Stars beyond it smear into streaks. The background radiation spectrum curves unexpectedly. A few unfortunate micrometeorites drifting too close elongate and vanish, not torn apart but gently translated elsewhere. Stabilization holding at 90%, Laleh says, voice barely above a whisper. We're within acceptable parameters. Acceptable for what? Mutters Kazuko. For survival? For a story someone will tell later? Clarify your metrics, Doctor. Foregoing, Laleh says simply. Human and allied ships maneuver into position. Arc vessels, station segments, small private craft drafted into the fleet. They cluster like a flight of birds at the edge of a storm, trusting an unseen current. On a family transport near the rear, a boy with hearing aids clutches his sibling's hand and asks if the new sky will sound different. His grandmother, whose knees ache with every movement, laughs softly and says she hopes so. On a Thamori freighter whose crew mutinied rather than participate in mercy relocations, 4 armed figures check straps and vow, quietly, to build a new home where no one will rank babies on a suffering scale. In a converted asteroid habitat bolted to a cargo hauler, the Unbroken Initiative's core team gathers around a central console. The woman with the chest unit, the man with the spinal brace, a programmer with a tremor. They all watch the countdown. Mahir's holo steps up to Dawnbringer's central vantage window. Outside, the corridor's shimmer swells. He opens a final wideband channel aiming it not at ships, but at anyone still listening in the old galaxy. We were told, he says, his voice steady though his heart is not, that to be truly civilized, we must end the lives of those whose bodies or minds do not meet a baseline of convenience, that caring for them is an indulgence we can no longer afford. Images from Yonah's hacked broadcast overlay his words in some feeds, ghosting Miri's smiling face and Tobias's calmly working hands over stars. We say, if that is civilization, we reject it. We will carry our so-called burdens with us, because they are not burdens. They are our composers, our mathematicians, our lovers, our comedians, our quiet neighbors. They are the ones who taught us what solidarity means, what patience feels like, what ingenuity truly is. He glances toward the engineering bay, where Laleh sweats in her rig, then toward the sensor chamber, where Tobias feels the universe sing. Without them, we would not have this engine. We would not have this map. The ones you voted to erase are the ones building our exit. His gaze hardens. We do not ask you to follow, but remember this. The path we open tonight will leave a scar in space-time. One day, centuries or millennia from now, when you tire of your cold equations and your mercy that looks like murder, You may trace that scar. You may find us, if we still live.
Or you may simply know that once a species refused your terms and left rather than comply.
He looks straight into the camera. To every child, on every world, who has been told you are too much trouble, too expensive, too broken, we are doing this for you. He nods to Kazuko. On your mark, Engineer Inoue. Kazuko swallows. Aeternum Engine full activation in 3, she says. 2, 1. The world tilts. To outside observers, the space around Dawnbringer flares with a light that is not quite any known wavelength. The corridor's mouth opens wide, a false horizon that curves in ways the eye cannot parse. Inside, gravity vectors lurch as the ship and its attendant fleet slip into the new geometry. For a moment, stomachs drop, ears ring, brains protest. Then the sensation passes, replaced by an eerie stillness. Stars vanish from forward view. In their place, a blackness so complete it seems to swallow thought, yet textured with faint swirling patterns of energy human instruments do not yet know how to name. Behind them, the Khorathi Vanguard's sensors go white with overload. Their attempts to lock on to specific targets fail. Their beams lance into the corridor's periphery and are bent, diffused, rendered harmless. The shock front from the Aeternum Engine's overdrive propagates back along the local hyperstructure. At the solar boundary, the Stabilization Armada's navigational arrays hiccup, then reboot, spitting out nonsense coordinates. Commanders shout. Courses are recalculated. Precious minutes are lost. On Orialis Spire, consoles flash alarm colors as an unprecedented space-time anomaly is logged in the Assembly's archive. In a quiet alcove, Shai'leph watches a simulation of the corridor's formation, its core pulsing with a light no one on Orialis can directly see. They did it, it says, this time with something like joy. On the human world, long used to watching the sky for danger, crowds blink as certain stars appear to shimmer faintly, an echo of the rift's disturbance. Some cheer, some weep. Some kneel in prayer, according to traditions older than spaceflight. In the Peregrine Array's control bay, structural warnings scream. Kazuko, the right flank of the bridge, is destabilizing. Laleh gasps. Her fingers dance over controls, trying to hold the weave. If we don't shut down soon, it will implode. If we shut down too fast, it could crack and send feedback through the engine. How much of the fleet is through? Mahir asks, clutching a railing. Core ships and primary arcs are in, Kazuko reports between gritted teeth. Some outliers still outside. 1 Thamori freighter, 2 human habitat modules, a handful of private craft. If we keep the bridge open, we risk everything, says a tactical officer. If we close it now, we strand those people. Mahir's bones ache with the choice. He sees the faces he will condemn, unknown, yet no less real for being statistics. He could, if he tried, think like a Khorathi, write them off as acceptable loss for the greater good. He cannot do it. Laleh, he says, voice low, is there any way to taper the field? Give them a chance to slip through without tearing ourselves apart? Laleh purses her lips, calculating at the edge of her capacity. Maybe, she says. If we redirect some of the excess load into the already open corridor, we can stretch the closure window. But that will hammer the ships already inside. It'll be a rougher ride. Some might lose structural elements. We could injure people. Is that acceptable? He asks softly, more to himself than to her. Her answer is immediate. It's better than leaving them behind or exploding all of us. Do it, he says. Warn the fleet. She pushes the engine past the line of prudence. For a few seconds, the stresses climb into the red. Inside the corridor, people feel the universe twist around them. In one arc, a hydroponic garden rack detaches and floats, smashing into a wall. Vines and nutrient solution fly in all directions. Children scream. Caregivers hold on. On a Aegis-side ship, the Thamori freighter's helmsbeing shrieks as their controls jitter. They shove their vessel forward, trusting the faint pull they feel in their gut. One by one, the stragglers slip into the corridor's narrowing mouth. At the exact moment the last outlier crosses, A spike in the load curve trips every failsafe in Kazuko's console. Now, she shouts.
Shut it down now.
Laleh slams her control paths to 0. The Aeternum Engine's rings flare, then dim as power routes shift into dissipation circuits. Outside, the Lumenreach Bridge's nodes flash white-hot, then flicker out. The huge, carefully tuned lattice unknits itself in a shower of harmless photons. The corridor winks shut behind the last fleeing ship. In their wake, a scar remains. A region of twisted vacuum, where light bends oddly, where the usual structures of space-time are slightly off. Instruments will catalog it for years. Children in distant systems will dare each other to fly near it. The Khorathi vanguard, thrown into navigational chaos by the sudden shift, cut power to avoid slamming into each other. Their commanders rage. Their comms officers draft furious protests about reckless manipulation of shared space-time resources. On the far side of the jump, silence. The Lumenreach fleet drifts in a darkness deeper than anything they have known. Their external views show no familiar constellations, no spiral, no bar of the Milky Way. Instead, faint smears of light in the distance, elongated galaxies seen from an alien angle, and a scatter of lonely, uncatalogued stars. Life support systems reboot from their emergency cycles. People pick themselves up from where they were thrown. Damage reports trickle in. There are injuries, some hull breaches, quickly sealed. No immediate catastrophic failures. On Dawnbringer's Bridge, the main viewport fills with the new sky. It is both underwhelming and overwhelming. So much nothing, so much not yet known. Mahir's holo flickers, then stabilizes. Communication lag is now longer, but still within workable limits thanks to pre-positioned relays pushed into the corridor behind the fleet. Kazuko slumps into a chair, muscles shaking. Laleh sits in her rig, head drooping, fingers cramping from overuse. Tobias leans back, eyes damp with relief, ears ringing from the last swell of the engine's tortured song. For a long moment, no one speaks. Then a child somewhere on a secondary deck laughs, delighted. "Look!" they shout. "The stars are wrong." The tension breaks. Laleh starts to cry, quietly, from a mixture of exhaustion and release. Kazuko reaches over and squeezes her shoulder. "We're not dead," she says. "That's a start." Mahir looks around the bridge that is not truly around him, given his physical body remains on Earth. For a heartbeat, he feels like a ghost in two worlds. Then he focuses. "Status?" he asks. "Engine holding at low idle," Kazuko reports. "We'll need serious repairs before we think about another push. We are somewhere between our home cluster and a small satellite galaxy, still well within intergalactic void territory." "Long way to anything," Tobias murmurs. "We brought what we need to start," Mahir says. Biodomes, genetics banks, libraries, people. Over the local channels, voices rise, captains checking in, communities announcing that they have power, that they have air, that their elders are alive. On one of the ARC ships, Yonah's chair is strapped into a communal lounge. She watches the new sky through a curved viewport. Her stomach still flips when she thinks how close they all came to shredding themselves. Beside her, a Thamori youth with a prosthetic arm leans forward, eyes wide. "We really did it," they whisper. "Yeah," Yonah says softly. They ask. She considers. "Not soon," she says. "They'll need time to patch their physics together, and even then, they might decide we're not worth the fuel. But they'll still have that standard," the Thamori says. "They'll still be like that. Maybe not forever," Yonah replies. She thinks of the scar they left, of the broadcasts, of Shai'leph's troubled glow, of Thamori riots, of small, incremental shifts in a very old assembly. "Maybe some of them will look up at the spot in the sky where we left and wonder if they made the right choice," she says. Doubt can be contagious. The Thamori nods, satisfied with that for now. In the grand deliberation hall back on Orialis, the ambient light strands have settled into a murky, uncertain green. The assembly representatives pore over data. Some denounce humanity as reckless. Others, quieter, ask uncomfortable questions. Is it wise, one delegate ventures, to hold so rigid a metric of worth? Praetor Vulketh glares down from the platform. It has lost face. Its enforcement armada failed to prevent the impossible. Its credibility is dented. It is necessary, Vulketh insists. We cannot let one dramatic gesture undermine the logic of the Standard. They will die out there in the dark, and their story will be a cautionary tale about hubris. Shai'leph's field pulses with a complex pattern that, among its own kind, signals polite dissent. Unless, it says softly, they do not. The hall does not have an answer. On a distant world, a parent wheels their disabled child into a clinic. On the wall screen, a recording of Mahir's speech plays, subtitled in the local tongue. The parent looks at the doctor and says, "If they can cross between galaxies for their kids, you can find a way to make room for mine." The doctor, who secretly loaded that video onto the clinic's loop, nods. In the intergalactic dark, the Lumenreach fleet begins to move, slowly, toward a faint smudge of light. A dwarf galaxy, whose spectra promise metals, warmth, the possibility of new worlds. In Dawnbringer's planning chamber, members of the Unbroken Initiative pin schematics to virtual boards. They sketch new governance models, new social contracts. In every draft, there is a line near the top. No life shall be ended by law for failing to meet a productivity standard. Outside, the new sky waits, vast and strange. Humanity, for all its flaws, has done something no one thought possible. It has refused to calculate away the inconvenient, and instead has moved heaven and earth, literally the heavens and the earth, to carry them along. Whether they will thrive here, in this emptiness, is a question for another generation. For now, they exist. Together, that is enough.